left my safe marriage for passion. Then I discovered the truth. The headline kept flashing in my mind like a warning sign I'd ignored for months. But back then, standing in the kitchen of the house I'd shared with my husband Daniel for 12 years, it felt more like liberation than regret. Daniel was steady, predictable, the kind of man who never raised his voice, paid the bills on time, remembered anniversaries with practical gifts like new kitchen appliances or spa certificates, and never once made me question where he was at 2 a.m. We'd met in graduate school, bonded over late-night study sessions and shared ambitions, married young because it seemed like the logical next step, and built a life that looked perfect on paper. Suburban home with a manicured lawn, 2 well-adjusted kids, Sophie now 10, and Ethan 8, careers that afforded vacations to the mountains every summer, and college funds started before the children could walk. Everyone said we were lucky, the couple who made it work, the ones still holding hands at neighborhood barbecues while others divorced or drifted apart. But inside, that safety was a slow suffocation I couldn't name until I met Leo at a design conference in Chicago. He was the opposite of Daniel in every visible way. Tall where Daniel was average, artistic where Daniel was analytical, with dark eyes that held yours like they were searching for secrets you hadn't even told yourself yet. We were paired for a workshop panel on innovative branding, spent hours debating color theory and typography over hotel coffee that tasted like regret, and by the second night the conversation had veered from work to everything else. Childhood dreams, fears we'd never voiced, the quiet dissatisfaction that creeps in when life becomes too comfortable. He listened the way no one had in years, really listened. And when he brushed my hand reaching for the same sugar packet, electricity shot through me so sharp I almost dropped my cup. We didn't kiss that night, didn't cross any lines beyond lingering glances and late texts that started innocent and turned intimate within days. But the messages kept coming after I flew home. Good morning photos of his city skyline, memes that made me laugh out loud in the carpool line. Voice notes where his low voice wrapped around my name like velvet. Daniel noticed nothing at first. He was buried in a big project at the firm, coming home late, kissing my forehead absently before collapsing into bed. I told myself it was harmless, just a spark of excitement in a routine that had grown dull. But the guilt was already there, small and nagging. Like a stone in my shoe I refused to shake out. Then came the weekend Daniel took the kids to visit his parents, leaving me alone in the house for 3 full days. Leo flew in on a whim, said he had a client meeting nearby, but we both knew it was a lie. We met at a quiet bar downtown, talked for hours until closing, then walked to his hotel because neither of us wanted the night to end. The kiss happened in the elevator, urgent, hungry, the kind that erases every rational thought, and when the doors opened on his floor, we didn't stop. That weekend was a blur of tangled sheets, whispered confessions, laughter that felt dangerous because it was so free. I told him everything, how Daniel's reliability sometimes felt like invisibility, how I'd stopped feeling desired years ago, how I'd begun wondering if this was all there was. Leo said he understood, said he'd been in a long-term relationship that ended because passion had died quietly, while they both pretended not to notice. We made promises we had no business making, future trips, late-night calls, a life where we didn't have to hide. When he left Sunday night, I cried in the airport parking lot, then drove home dry-eyed, showered twice to erase his scent, and greeted Daniel and the kids with hugs that felt rehearsed. The affair continued in stolen moments. Lunch breaks turned into hotel rooms, business trips extended by a day, texts deleted immediately after reading. I told myself I was careful, that no one would get hurt if I was discreet, but guilt grew heavier with every lie. Daniel started asking questions. Not suspicious yet, just gentle concern. You seem distracted lately. Everything okay at work? I blamed stress, deadlines, the usual excuses, and he accepted them because he trusted me, because that was who he was. Then, one evening after the kids were in bed, Daniel sat me down at the kitchen table with 2 mugs of tea and said quietly, "I think we need to talk about us." My heart stopped. I was sure he knew. But instead, he said he felt the distance too, that he'd been burying himself in work to avoid facing how disconnected we'd become. That he wanted to try counseling, to fight for what we had. His vulnerability cracked something inside me. The man I'd once loved deeply was still there, asking for a chance. And here I was planning to leave him for someone I barely knew beyond hotel sheets and late-night calls. I cried then. Real tears told him I was unhappy but didn't say why. Promised to think about counseling, while my mind raced to Leo's number burning in my phone. The next morning I told Leo we needed to slow down, that I couldn't keep living 2 lives. He was understanding, said he'd wait, but the passion that had felt so alive began to feel reckless, selfish, unsustainable. Weeks passed in limbo, therapy sessions with Daniel where we talked about communication and date nights, but never the full truth, secret meetups with Leo that grew shorter, more frantic, laced with the knowledge that something had to give. Then came the night that changed everything. Daniel was out of town for a conference, kids at sleepovers, house empty and echoing. Leo came over, first time in our home, and as we lay in the guest room afterward, tangled and breathless, his phone buzzed on the nightstand. He reached for it casually, smiled at the screen, typed a quick reply. I glanced over, saw the name Sarah and a string of hearts, Then a preview message. Miss you already. Can't wait for our anniversary trip next month. Time slowed. I asked who Sarah was. He hesitated too long. Then he sat up, ran a hand through his hair, and said the words that shattered the illusion I'd built. She's my wife. We've been married 14 years. I never told you because I didn't want to lose what we had. The room spun. I pushed him away, scrambled for clothes, voice shaking as I demanded details. Yes, they had kids too. Yes, this was supposed to be just an escape for him. Nothing serious. He tried to explain, said his marriage was comfortable but passionless, that I was different, that he could leave her if I wanted. But every word sounded like the excuses I'd fed myself about Daniel. I threw him out, locked the door, sank to the floor in the hallway and sobbed until my throat ached. The passion I'd left my safe marriage for wasn't real. It was a mirror of the same deception I'd been committing. Leo wasn't the answer. He was the proof that running toward fire doesn't warm you. It burns everything down. That night I stared at the ceiling until dawn, replaying every moment, every lie I'd told Daniel, every promise I'd broken, and realized the truth I discovered wasn't just about Leo. It was about me, about the parts of myself I tried to outrun instead of facing, about choosing fantasy over the hard work of rebuilding what was already mine. Morning came gray and cold. I made coffee with shaking hands, waited for Daniel to come home, and knew that whatever came next, whether forgiveness, separation, or something in between, I would face it honestly this time. No more hiding, no more chasing illusions. The safe marriage I'd left wasn't perfect, but it had been real. The passion I'd chased had been a beautiful, devastating lie. And now, with the truth laid bare, I had to decide what kind of life I actually wanted to build from the ashes. The days after Leo's confession blurred into a gray haze of disbelief and self-recrimination, each hour stretching longer than the last as I moved through the house like a ghost in my own life. Touching surfaces, countertops, doorknobs, the kids' backpacks hanging by the door, wondering how everything could look so unchanged when inside me everything had cracked wide open. Daniel returned from his conference Sunday evening, tired but smiling, carrying souvenirs from the airport gift shop, tiny keychains for the kids, a bottle of local wine for us to share later. He kissed my cheek, asked how my weekend had been, and I managed a week. Quiet, just caught up on some work, the lie slipping out smoother than I expected, because by then, lying had become muscle memory. Sophie bounded in asking about his trip, Ethan trailing behind with questions about the hotel pool, and for a moment the normalcy felt like a lifeline. I clung to their chatter, their small hands tugging at my sleeves, anything to drown out the echo of Leo's voice saying, "She's my wife." That night in bed, Daniel reached for me, gentle as always, and I let him, not because I wanted to, but because refusing would have required an explanation I wasn't ready to give. His touch felt familiar, safe, but distant, like hugging someone through glass. Afterward, he fell asleep quickly, breathing steady against my shoulder, while I stared at the ceiling fan spinning slow circles and replayed every moment with Leo. The way he'd looked at me like I was the only person in the world, the promises whispered in the dark, the way I'd believed, truly believed, that what we had was different, special, worth risking everything for. Morning brought no clarity, only a dull ache behind my eyes and a text from Leo that I deleted without reading. I blocked his number, then unblocked it 5 minutes later, then blocked it again. The indecision exhausting. At breakfast, Daniel noticed the shadows under my eyes, asked if I was feeling okay, and I blamed a migraine, popped 2 ibuprofen with coffee, and drove the kids to school in silence while they argued in the back seat about whose turn it was to pick the radio station. Dropping them off felt like shedding weight. I sat in the parking lot afterward, engine running, forehead against the steering wheel, and cried the kind of ugly, heaving sobs that leave you empty. When the tears slowed, I wiped my face with the sleeve of my hoodie, checked my reflection in the rearview mirror, red eyes, puffy nose, and drove to the office because staying home alone with my thoughts was unbearable. Work provided structure, deadlines that demanded focus, colleagues who asked polite questions I answered with practiced smiles. But every quiet moment brought Leo back, his laugh, his hands, the way he'd said, "I could leave her if you wanted," as if that made the deception noble instead of cruel. I started researching affairs online during lunch breaks, anonymous forums where women shared stories of discovery, of leaving safe marriages for passion only to find the new man was just as capable of lies. Sometimes worse. One post stuck with me. The thrill isn't love, it's the escape from feeling ordinary. But ordinary is what lasts. I closed the tab, heart pounding, and wondered if I'd been running from boredom rather than towards something real. Therapy had been Daniel's idea, but now it felt urgent. I booked a solo session for the following week, telling the receptionist it was for personal stress, not mentioning the affair or the betrayal I'd both committed and been subjected to. Daniel, meanwhile, doubled down on trying to reconnect. He planned a date night at our favorite Italian place, held my hand across the table, talked about taking a weekend away just us, about rediscovering what we'd lost. His effort was genuine, painful in its sincerity, and every time he looked at me with hope, I felt the weight of my secret press harder against my ribs. I smiled, nodded, promised to try, but inside the guilt churned like acid. Leo tried contacting me through email, subject line, "We need to talk," and I marked it unread, then deleted the account entirely, a small act of finality that felt both freeing and hollow. Weeks passed in that fragile limbo, therapy where I skirted the full truth, saying only that I felt disconnected and confused about what I want. Daniel responding with patience and small gestures, a note left on the mirror saying, "I love you more every day." Office, just because. The kids sensed the undercurrent without understanding it. Sophie asked once why I seemed sad all the time, and I hugged her tight. Told her grown-ups sometimes feel big feelings, but it would be okay. But I wasn't sure it would. Then came the afternoon that forced everything into sharper focus. I was picking up Ethan from soccer practice when my phone buzzed with a notification from an unknown number. A photo attachment. I opened it in the car while waiting in the pickup line. A screenshot of Leo's social media, him smiling beside a woman. Sarah, I assumed, arms around each other at what looked like a family barbecue. Caption reading, 14 years and still my favorite adventure. Below it, a text. Thought you should see what he's really like. He does this every few years. You're not the first. No sender name, no context. Just the image burning into my retinas. My hands shook so badly I dropped the phone. Ethan climbed into the backseat asking why I looked scared. And I forced a laugh, said I'd seen a spider, started driving home on autopilot. That night, after the kids were asleep, I sat at the kitchen table with my laptop open, searching Leo's name for the first time properly. Social profiles locked down, but old posts, tagged photos, a wedding registry from 14 years ago still archived somewhere. Every discovery confirmed what he'd admitted and what the anonymous message suggested. This wasn't a one-time lapse. It was a pattern. Passion for him wasn't about connection. It was about conquest, about feeling alive through secrecy and risk. I closed the laptop, leaned my head on my arms, and felt something shift inside me. Not rage exactly, but clarity. The truth I discovered wasn't just that Leo was married. It was that I'd been willing to destroy my own marriage for an illusion. That I'd romanticized betrayal as destiny. That the safe life I'd scorned had been built on trust I'd casually shattered. Daniel came downstairs for water, saw me sitting there in the dark, asked what was wrong. I looked up at him, really looked, and saw the man who'd never lied to me, who'd stayed through mundane years and small disappointments, who still wanted to fight for us even when I'd stopped fighting first. Tears came again, quieter this time. "I think I've been lost," I whispered. He sat beside me, took my hand without pressing for more. "Then let's find our way back together. No accusations, no demands, just quiet acceptance." In that moment, I understood the deepest truth. Passion can blind you, but love, the steady choosing kind, can see you through the aftermath if you're brave enough to face it. The road ahead would be hard. Full honesty, painful conversations, perhaps forgiveness that felt impossible. But for the first time since Chicago, I wasn't running. I was choosing to stay, not out of fear or habit, but because I finally saw what I almost threw away. And that realization, raw and humbling, was the beginning of whatever came next. The clarity that had arrived in the dark kitchen, with Daniel's hand in mine, didn't erase the mess I'd made. It simply illuminated it, throwing every lie and half-truth into harsh relief, so that ignoring them was no longer possible. The next morning, I woke before dawn, the house still wrapped and quiet, and sat at the kitchen table with a notebook I hadn't touched in years, pen trembling as I began writing the truth. Not for anyone else yet, but for myself. A brutal inventory of choices that had brought me here, page after page filled with confessions. The first message from Leo that made my heart race. The hotel weekend, where I'd convinced myself passion equaled destiny. The nights I'd deleted texts while Daniel slept beside me. The way I'd looked at my husband and seen obligation instead of love. The words hurt to write, each one a small excision, but leaving them unsaid felt worse. By the time the kids stirred upstairs, I had 8 pages of raw honesty, ink smudged from tears I hadn't noticed falling. Daniel came down in his robe, hair still sleep-tasseled, and saw me sitting there, notebook open, eyes red. He didn't ask what I was writing. He simply poured 2 coffees, set one in front of me, and sat across the table waiting. I closed the notebook, took a shaky breath, and started talking. I told him everything. Chicago, the conference, the text that turned intimate, the affair that had lasted 5 months, Leo's hotel visits, the night in our guest room, the photo that revealed his wife, the anonymous message that confirmed the pattern. I didn't spare details because sparing them would have been another lie. I watched his face change from confusion to shock to something quieter, deeper, grief perhaps, or the slow recognition that the woman he trusted had become a stranger. He didn't interrupt, didn't rage. He just listened, hands wrapped around his mug until his knuckles whitened. When I finished, silence stretched between us, thick and heavy. Then he spoke, voice low and careful. I knew something was wrong. I thought it was work, or the kids, or me not being enough. I never thought. He trailed off, looked away, then back at me. Why him? Why now? I had no easy answer, only the truth I'd been avoiding. I'd felt invisible, desired only in theory, And Leo had made me feel seen, alive, wanted in a way that terrified and thrilled me. I was selfish, I said. I wanted to feel something again, and I didn't care who got hurt as long as it wasn't me. Daniel nodded slowly, eyes glistening but not spilling over. I'm angry. I'm hurt. But I'm also relieved you told me. Keeping it secret would have killed us slower. We sat there until the kids came down demanding cereal, the normal morning routine snapping back into place like a mask we both wore for their sake. The next weeks were a strange limbo of brutal honesty and fragile attempts at normalcy. We scheduled couples therapy immediately, found a counselor who specialized in infidelity recovery, and attended sessions twice a week, where we learned words like betrayal trauma and emotional affair and accountability. Daniel spoke of feeling foolish for not seeing the signs, of questioning every late night I'd claimed to be working, every sudden interest in new clothes or perfume. I listened without defending, owning every deception, every time I'd chosen secrecy over connection. At home, we set rules. Full phone transparency, no deleting messages, location sharing turned on, separate bedrooms for now because touch felt complicated, loaded with questions neither of us could answer yet. The kids noticed the tension. Sophie asked why Daddy slept in the guest room. Ethan drew pictures of our family with sad faces, and we told them we were working through grown-up problems but loved them and each other very much. Promises we both meant, even if the path forward remained unclear. Leo tried one last time. Flowers delivered to my office with a card that read, I miss you. We can still make this work. And I returned them unopened with a note. There is no this. Do not contact me again. I changed my number that afternoon, blocked every possible avenue, and felt the final thread snap. Therapy unearthed deeper truths. My fear of ordinary life had driven me to chase intensity, but intensity without foundation was just chaos. Daniel admitted he'd withdrawn into work to avoid confronting our growing distance, that he'd assumed stability meant no effort was needed. We began small experiments. Weekly date nights with no phones, walks after dinner where we talked about dreams instead of schedules, reading the same book so we could discuss it over coffee. Some nights ended in tears, others in tentative laughter. One evening, Daniel asked if I still loved him, and I answered honestly, yes, but differently now. More honestly, maybe for the first time. He nodded, squeezed my hand, and we kept walking. Friends and family noticed the shift. Some asked questions we answered vaguely. Others offered quiet support when we finally shared the broad strokes. My mother called one Sunday, voice gentle. Marriage isn't supposed to be easy forever. It's supposed to be chosen forever. Her words stayed with me, a reminder that safety wasn't the problem. Complacency was. The passion I'd chased with Leo had been a mirage, beautiful from afar, but dissolving on contact. What Daniel and I were rebuilding was slower, messier, but real. Conversations that lasted hours, apologies that came without prompting, small acts of kindness that felt earned instead of automatic. One night, months into therapy, Daniel looked at me across the dinner table after the kids were in bed and said, I don't know if I can ever forget, but I think I can forgive, if we keep doing the work. I reached for his hand, felt the familiar warmth, and whispered, me too. The truth I'd discovered wasn't just Leo's deception or my own. It was that passion alone isn't enough to sustain a life. It needs roots, history, the willingness to stay when the thrill fades. Leaving the safe marriage had almost cost me everything, but returning to it, honestly, painfully, deliberately, was teaching me that safety, when chosen freely and rebuilt with intention, could hold room for passion too. Not the reckless kind that burns hot and fast, but the quieter, deeper kind that grows from trust rebuilt one truthful day at a time. And in that slow, steady choosing, I began to feel something I hadn't in years. Truly seen, truly wanted, truly home. The months that followed our first full confession settled into a rhythm that felt both foreign and fragile, like learning to walk again after a long illness. Every step deliberate, every balance tested. Every fall met with quiet determination rather than despair. Therapy became the anchor. Twice weekly sessions where the counselor's office smelled faintly of lavender diffuser and old books. A neutral space where Daniel and I could speak truths we'd once buried under polite silences and busy schedules. In those rooms, we mapped the fault lines, my fear of fading into invisibility after years of being the reliable wife and mother, his habit of retreating into spreadsheets and deadlines when emotions grew too loud, the way we'd both stopped asking the hard questions because asking meant risking answers neither of us wanted to hear. The counselor taught us exercises, daily check-ins where we shared one thing we appreciated and one thing we needed, no defensiveness allowed. Repair attempts, where if an argument started spiraling, we could use a code word to pause and reset. At first, the exercises felt awkward, scripted, but over time they became habit. Daniel leaving sticky notes on the bathroom mirror, saying, I appreciate how you always make sure the kids have breakfast ready. I need more of your laughter in the evenings. And me responding with small gestures, like turning off my phone during dinner, or suggesting we watch his favorite documentary instead of defaulting to mine. Physical intimacy returned slowly, cautiously, first holding hands during walks, then longer hugs in the kitchen, then nights where we shared the bed again, Not rushing toward passion, but rediscovering touch as comfort rather than obligation. Some nights Daniel would pull away mid-kiss, eyes shadowed, whispering, "I still see him when I close my eyes," and I would hold him without excuses, letting the grief breathe until it eased. Other nights I would freeze under his touch, memories of Leo's hands flashing unbidden, and Daniel would stop immediately. No anger, just quiet understanding. We'll wait until it's only us in the room. The waiting taught patience I hadn't known I possessed. The kids adapted in their own ways. Sophie started journaling more, filling notebooks with stories about families who faced dragons together and came out stronger. Ethan asked blunt questions like, "Are you and Dad getting divorced?" And we answered honestly, "We're working really hard to stay together because we love each other and you." They didn't need the full story yet, only the reassurance that their world wasn't collapsing. We protected their routines fiercely. Family dinners every night, weekend soccer games, bedtime stories read in voices that grew steadier with practice. Outside the house, life continued its ordinary march. Parent-teacher conferences where teachers praised the kids' focus, despite some home stress. Neighborhood barbecues where friends asked careful questions and we answered with vague smiles and, "We're doing better, thanks." A few close friends knew more. My sister flew in for a weekend, held me while I cried on her shoulder, then told Daniel straight, "She messed up big, but she's fighting to fix it. Don't let pride stop you from seeing that." He nodded, hugged her, and later that night told me he was trying, not just for the kids, but because he still believed in us. Leo's shadow lingered in subtler ways. I avoided the conference hotel when work took me to Chicago again. Deleted every playlist we'd shared. Even changed my perfume because the scent reminded me of hotel sheets. Daniel never asked me to prove loyalty through restrictions. He trusted my choices now because I was making them openly. But he did ask for transparency about triggers. If a song came on that reminded me of Leo, I told him. If a memory surfaced during intimacy, I paused and said so. Honesty became our new safety net. 6 months in, during a rare child-free weekend away, our first since the confession, we rented a small cabin in the mountains. No agenda beyond breathing the same air without distractions. We hiked trails where the only sounds were wind through pines and our footsteps sinking. We cooked simple meals over the stove, laughed at how we still argued over how much salt to add. We sat on the porch, wrapped in one blanket, watching stars appear one by one. On the second night, Daniel turned to me, voice steady but soft. "I forgive you." Not because it didn't hurt. It did, every day. But because I see how much you're choosing us now. And I want to choose this too. Tears came, not from guilt this time, but from gratitude so deep it ached. I told him the same. I forgave myself, not easily, not completely, but enough to stop punishing us both for my mistakes. We made love that night, slowly, deliberately. No ghosts in the room. Just two people who'd walked through fire and emerged still reaching for each other. Returning home felt different. The house no longer carried the weight of secrets. It held the quiet strength of choices renewed. We started small traditions. Sunday morning pancakes where the kids helped flip them. Evening walks around the block hand in hand. Monthly State of the Union talks where we checked in without judgment. Passion didn't return as fireworks. It grew as embers. Steady, warm, sustainable. I discovered that the safe marriage I'd once fled wasn't inherently dull. It had been dimmed by neglect, by the assumption that love didn't need tending. Reigniting it required effort, vulnerability, the daily decision to see and be seen. The truth I discovered wasn't merely Leo's betrayal, or my own. It was that real passion isn't found by running away. It's cultivated by staying. By choosing the person beside you again and again, even when the spark feels faint. Daniel and I weren't the same couple we'd been before Chicago. We were scarred, yes, but stronger in the mending, more honest in the loving. And in that hard-won honesty, I finally understood. The safest place isn't the one without risk. It's the one where risk is met with commitment, where truth is spoken even when it hurts, where love is rebuilt not despite the breaks, but through them. The first anniversary of the confession arrived quietly, unmarked by celebration or ceremony, yet impossible to ignore. The calendar date circled in my mind like a bruise that had faded to pale yellow, but still ached when pressed. Daniel and I had agreed early on not to turn it into an event. No forced romantic gestures or dramatic recommitments. Just another day where we chose to keep showing up. That morning, I woke to the smell of coffee already brewing, and found him in the kitchen. Sleeves rolled up, making pancakes the way Sophie liked them. Extra chocolate chips in hers. Plain for Ethan, a small stack for me with fresh strawberries because he remembered I preferred them over syrup. The kids were still asleep, the house wrapped in soft pre-dawn light, and when he turned to hand me a mug, our fingers brushed longer than necessary. A silent acknowledgement that we'd survived another trip around the sun since the night everything cracked open. We ate in companionable quiet. The only sounds, the scrape of forks and the distant hum of the refrigerator, when the kids finally thundered downstairs demanding breakfast. The moment passed naturally into ordinary chaos. School lunches packed, backpacks zipped, last-minute permission slips signed. But the quiet carried forward through the day. Daniel texted me mid-morning, just to say thinking of you. I replied with a photo of the view from my office window. Ordinary rooftops under a pale sky, and felt something settle deeper inside me. The knowledge that small, consistent acts were rebuilding what grand declarations never could. Therapy had tapered to once a month by then, more maintenance than crisis intervention. We still went, still did the check-ins, but the conversations had shifted from damage control to growth. How to keep noticing each other, how to name needs before they became resentments, how to celebrate progress without pretending the scars weren't there. The counselor asked us once what forgiveness looked like now, a year later. Daniel answered first. It looks like choosing her every day, even on days when the memory stings. It's not forgetting, it's deciding the future is worth more than the past. I added that for me it was learning to trust my own voice again, to speak wants and fears without first calculating how they'd land, to stop running toward escape when discomfort arose. We left that session holding hands, not because we had to perform coupledom, but because the touch felt honest. Physical intimacy had evolved too, not the frantic reclaiming of early months, nor the cautious distance that followed, but something slower, more present. Some nights we still hesitated, still checked in with quiet words. Is this okay? Are you here with me? But the answers came easier, the moments less shadowed. Other nights passion arrived unannounced, less like fireworks and more like a slow-burning hearth. Warm, steady, rooted in the certainty that the person across from you had seen your worst and stayed. The kids grew taller, louder, more themselves. Sophie started middle school, navigating friend drama with a journal and a surprising amount of grace. Ethan discovered chess and spent hours moving pieces across the board, declaring checkmate with triumphant glee. We protected their world fiercely. No whispered arguments behind closed doors. No tense silences at dinner. And in doing so, protected our own. We began hosting small family gatherings again. Thanksgiving with both sets of parents. Christmas with traditions we'd let lapse during the hardest months. And the house filled with voices, laughter, the clink of glasses, proof that life hadn't stopped while we were repairing it. One evening in late spring, after the kids were in bed, Daniel pulled out an old photo album we hadn't opened in years. Our wedding, early vacations, baby pictures of Sophie and Ethan. We sat on the living room floor, pages turning slowly, laughing at awkward haircuts and outdated fashion, pausing on moments that felt both distant and achingly familiar. When we reached a photo of us on our honeymoon, arms around each other on a beach at sunset, he traced the frame with his finger and said quietly, I still see that woman when I look at you. She's still here, just more now. I leaned against his shoulder, tears pricking but not falling. I see you too. The man who stayed when he had every reason to leave. We didn't make love that night. We just sat there, album open between us, breathing the same air, letting the past and present overlap without forcing them to reconcile. The truth I discovered kept unfolding in layers. Leo's betrayal had been the catalyst, but my own choices had been the deeper wound. Choosing fantasy over reality, intensity over intimacy, escape over effort. Leaving the safe marriage had almost destroyed it, but returning with eyes wide open had revealed that safety wasn't the absence of risk. It was the presence of commitment strong enough to weather it. Passion, I learned, wasn't something you chased or lost. It was something you cultivated through mundane Tuesdays, through apologies that stuck, through nights when you chose to stay even when leaving felt easier. Daniel and I weren't perfect. Arguments still flared. Old insecurities still surfaced. Triggers still caught us off guard. But we had tools now. Words instead of walls. Curiosity instead of assumption. Forgiveness practiced daily like a muscle. One rainy Saturday, we drove the kids to the mountains for no reason other than fresh air. We hiked a short trail, the kids racing ahead collecting leaves and stones. Daniel and I walking slower behind them. At a lookout point we stopped, watched clouds drift across the valley below, and he slipped his arm around my waist. Remember when we thought safe meant boring, he asked. I laughed softly. I remember thinking passion meant everything. Turns out it means nothing without trust. He kissed my temple, light and sure. We've got both now. The view stretched wide and endless. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel the urge to run towards something brighter on the horizon. What we had, imperfect, hard-won, deeply chosen, was enough, more than enough. It was home, and in that quiet realization, the story of leaving for passion and discovering the truth came full circle, not with the dramatic ending, but with the steady, unspectacular beauty of two people who had broken each other and then, together, learned how to mend. The second year after the confession felt less like recovery and more like living ordinary days stacking one upon another until the weight of the past no longer dragged every moment down with it. Daniel and I had reached a place where the memory of Leo surfaced rarely. No longer a daily intruder, but an occasional visitor that arrived quietly, was acknowledged, and then shown the door without drama. We still did the work, monthly therapy check-ins, weekly date nights that had become less obligatory and more anticipated, small rituals like leaving voice notes for each other during busy days, or texting, one thing we were grateful for before bed, but the effort had shifted from repair to nurture, from fixing what was broken to growing what was healing. The kids were thriving in the stability we'd fought to preserve. Sophie had discovered theater, spending afternoons rehearsing lines in her room with dramatic flair. Ethan had joined a robotics club at school and came home every Tuesday covered in glue and triumph. We attended their performances and competitions side by side, clapping louder than anyone else, our hands finding each other instinctively in the dark auditorium or bright gym. One evening after Sophie's school play, where she played the lead in a production about courage and second chances, Daniel and I drove home with the kids asleep in the back seat. The car filled with the soft glow of dashboard lights and the quiet satisfaction of a good night. He reached over, squeezed my knee, and said simply, "We did that, together." I covered his hand with mine and felt the truth of it settle deep. We had not only survived the fracture, we had rebuilt something stronger around the break. Passion, the kind I'd once chased so desperately, had returned. Not as a wildfire consuming everything in its path, but as a steady flame fed by trust and time. There were nights when desire arrived, sudden and fierce, clothes shed in the hallway, laughter muffled against skin. There were others when closeness meant simply lying together, breathing in sync, talking about nothing and everything until sleep claimed us. The difference was presence. No longer wondering if the other person was fully there, no ghosts hovering at the edges of touch. We had learned to name what we wanted without shame, to ask without fear of rejection, to say no without it feeling like failure. In therapy, we talked about emotional safety as the foundation for everything else, and slowly, deliberately, we built it. Full disclosure of feelings, even the uncomfortable ones. No secrets, even small ones. The understanding that vulnerability wasn't weakness but the truest form of strength. Outside our home, life expanded in quiet ways. I took on bigger design projects, including one for a women's shelter that focused on stories of rebuilding after betrayal, posters, brochures, a website that gave survivors resources and hope. And every time I worked on it, I felt the echo of my own story, not as pain, but as purpose. Daniel started mentoring younger colleagues at the firm, sharing not just technical knowledge, but lessons about balance, about showing up fully for the people who mattered most. We began traveling again, not extravagant escapes, but short trips that felt like adventures. A weekend in a coastal town where we walked the beach at dawn, collecting shells the kids would later turn into art projects. A cabin in the woods where we read by the fire and the kids roasted marshmallows until their faces were sticky with triumph. Each journey reminded us that new memories could layer over old ones. That joy wasn't something we had to chase, but something we could cultivate right where we stood. One crisp autumn afternoon, while raking leaves in the backyard, Sophie and Ethan turning the piles into jumping forts, Daniel paused, leaned on the rake, and looked at me across the yard. "Do you ever miss it?" he asked quietly. The thrill. The not knowing. I set down my own rake, walked over, and stood close enough to feel his warmth. Sometimes I miss the feeling of being wanted so badly it hurt, but I don't miss the cost. I don't miss lying. I don't miss wondering if I was enough. He nodded slowly. I don't miss wondering where you were, or who you were thinking about. We stood there a long moment, leaves drifting around us like confetti. Then he pulled me into a hug that smelled of earth and effort. "We're enough now," he murmured against my hair. "More than enough." The kids called us over to see their leaf mountain, and we ran to join them, laughing as we all tumbled into the pile, arms and legs tangled, voices rising in mock outrage and real delight. In that moment, messy, loud, perfectly imperfect, I understood the deepest layer of the truth I'd discovered. The safe marriage I'd once dismissed as boring had never been the problem. My refusal to tend it, to choose it daily, had been. Passion wasn't something external to find or steal. It was the natural outcome of two people who saw each other clearly, who chose each other repeatedly, who built safety strong enough to hold desire without smothering it. Daniel and I weren't the couple we'd been before Chicago, nor the couple I'd imagined we could become by running toward someone else. We were something new, scarred, yes, but wiser, tested, but resilient, ordinary in the best way, because ordinary, when chosen with intention, becomes extraordinary. The story of leaving for passion and discovering the truth had ended not in ruin, but in return, not to the past, but to a present we had both fought to claim. And as winter approached, with holidays on the horizon and another year of small, steady choices ahead, I felt no need to look back for validation. What we had built was real, rooted, and ours. That was the only truth that mattered now. The third year after the confession arrived so quietly it almost slipped past unnoticed, marked only by the small, cumulative ways our life had deepened rather than by any single dramatic turning point. Daniel and I had long since stopped counting the days since the truth came out, stopped measuring progress against that single night when everything fractured. Instead, we measured it in the ordinary accumulation of mornings waking beside each other without hesitation. Evenings where conversation flowed without the undercurrent of unspoken questions. Nights where sleep came easy because trust had been rebuilt brick by quiet brick. Therapy had ended formally the previous spring. The counselor had smiled during our last session and said, "You don't need me to hold the space anymore. You're holding it for each other now." We left that office hand in hand, not because we had to prove anything, but because the touch felt natural, unburdened. The kids were growing into versions of themselves that felt both startling and inevitable. Sophie, now 13, had traded theater for debate club. arguing passionately about climate policy and social justice with the same intensity she once brought to memorized lines. Ethan, 11, had discovered coding and spent hours in his room building small games that he proudly demoed to us over dinner, explaining variables and loops with the solemnity of a professor. We listened, asked questions, celebrated their wins. Sophie's first tournament trophy displayed on the mantle. Ethan's game uploaded to a kid-friendly platform where strangers left encouraging comments, and in doing so, reinforced the stability we'd fought so hard to reclaim. Our own routines had evolved into something richer. Daniel had negotiated a hybrid work schedule that let him be home 3 days a week, turning the spare room into a shared office, where we sometimes worked side by side, music playing softly, occasional glances across the room carrying more meaning than words. I'd taken on a part-time teaching role at a local community college, introductory graphic design for adults returning to education, and found unexpected joy in watching students light up when they grasped a concept that had once intimidated them. The work felt like quiet redemption, helping others build confidence in their creativity, while I continued to build mine without the shadow of secrecy. Physical closeness had become as varied and honest as everything else. Some days desire arrived urgent and playful, clothes left in a trail from the front door to the bedroom, laughter turning to gasps. Other days it was slower, more tender, hands tracing familiar paths with renewed wonder, and some nights intimacy meant simply holding each other through a difficult conversation or a bad dream. No expectation beyond presence. We had learned that passion wasn't a fixed state to chase or maintain. It ebbed and flowed, sometimes quiet, sometimes fierce, always rooted in the safety we'd rebuilt together. One weekend in early fall, we took the family to the same mountain cabin, where we'd gone the year forgiveness first felt possible. The kids ran ahead on the trails, collecting pine cones and arguing about whose fort was better. Daniel and I walked slower, fingers laced, the air crisp with the scent of turning leaves. At the lookout point, we stopped again. The same valley stretching below, clouds drifting in the same lazy patterns. He turned to me, eyes steady. "Do you remember what I said here last time?" I nodded. "That we're enough." He smiled, small and real. "I still mean it. More now." I leaned into him, felt the solid warmth of his shoulder. "I do too." We stood there until the kids called us back, voices echoing up the path. And as we rejoined them, Sophie showing off a perfectly symmetrical leaf, Ethan demonstrating how to skip stones across a small creek, I felt the full weight of what we'd built. Not a return to who we'd been before Leo. Not an erasure of the pain, but a deliberate evolution into something deeper, more resilient, more honest. The truth I'd discovered years ago had layers I was still uncovering. That leaving for passion had been less about Leo and more about my fear of ordinary love. That ordinary love, when chosen daily and tended honestly, becomes the rarest and most sustaining kind of passion. That betrayal, mine and his, hadn't destroyed us irreparably because we'd both refused to let it. We weren't perfect. Arguments still flared, about schedules, about money, about whose turn it was to fold laundry. But they ended faster now, resolved with apologies that came quickly and forgiveness that stuck. Triggers still appeared occasionally. A song on the radio, a certain cologne in a crowd, a mention of Chicago in conversation. And when they did, we named them without shame, talked through them, let them pass like clouds across an otherwise clear sky. Friends who'd watched us navigate the hardest parts sometimes asked how we did it, how we rebuilt after something so shattering. Daniel would shrug and say, "We chose each other, every day, even when it was hard." I would add, "We stopped pretending it was easy and started making it real." The answers were simple, but the practice was lifelong. As winter approached again, with holidays filling the calendar and another year drawing to its close, I found myself grateful in ways I hadn't known were possible. Grateful for the man who'd stayed when leaving would have been easier, for the children who'd grown in the shelter of our effort, for the woman I'd become through the fire of my own mistakes. The safe marriage I'd once fled had never been the cage I'd imagined. It had been a foundation waiting for me to return and build higher, wider, stronger. Passion hadn't been lost. It had been waiting, patient, to be rediscovered in the daily choosing, in the quiet acts of repair, in the shared laughter over burnt pancakes, and the steady rhythm of two hearts that had learned against all odds to beat in time again. And in that steady rhythm, I finally understood the deepest truth of all. The safest place isn't the one without storms. It's the one where you weather them together, emerge together, and choose again and again to stay. The 4th year after the confession arrived like any other season, unannounced, inevitable, carrying with it the gentle accumulation of time that turns sharp memories into soft outlines. Daniel and I no longer marked the date of that long ago night when secrets spilled across the kitchen table. No longer needed to measure healing against a calendar, because healing had become the background rhythm of our days rather than the foreground struggle. The house had changed subtly with us, a fresh coat of paint in the living room chosen together. One rainy Saturday, new bookshelves lining the hallway filled with novels we'd read aloud to each other on quiet evenings. The kids' artwork framed and hung without apology for its imperfections. Sophie was 15 now, all sharp opinions and quiet dreams of studying environmental law. already volunteering at local cleanup drives and arguing passionately at family dinners about policy changes she believed could save the planet. Ethan, 13, had traded robotics for music, teaching himself guitar through YouTube tutorials and filling the house with tentative chords that grew surer by the week. We watched them unfold with the mixture of pride and quiet awe that comes when you realize your children are no longer extensions of you, but fully separate people writing their own stories. Our own story had settled into something steady and deep, marriage not as a static achievement, but as an ongoing, living choice, renewed in countless small ways. Daniel still leaving coffee on the counter before he left for the office, still texting me mid-afternoon just to say he was thinking about me. Me still slipping notes into his lunch bag when he forgot to pack one. Still reaching for his hand first during walks around the neighborhood. Passion had found its natural place. Not the explosive kind I'd once chased in hotel rooms and stolen hours, but the enduring kind that arrives in the ordinary. A slow kiss in the kitchen, while dinner simmers. Fingers tracing familiar paths under blankets on a Sunday morning. Shared laughter over nothing at all that turned suddenly serious and tender. We had learned that desire thrives not in secrecy or intensity alone, but in the safety of being fully known and fully accepted. One crisp October weekend, we drove back to the mountain cabin again. Not out of ritual, but because the kids wanted to see the fall colors and we wanted the quiet. The trails were the same, the lookout point unchanged, but we were different. Older, softer around the edges, carrying the quiet confidence of people who had walked through fire and emerged together. While Sophie and Ethan raced ahead collecting leaves for a scrapbook project, Daniel and I lingered at the overlook, the valley below painted in gold and crimson. He slipped his arm around my waist, pulled me close against the chill. 4 years, he said softly. Not as a marker of pain, but as a milestone of endurance. Feels like a lifetime ago. I leaned into him, felt the steady beat of his heart against my shoulder. It does, and it doesn't. Some days it's like yesterday. The guilt, the fear. Other days it's ancient history, something that happened to other people. He nodded, kissed the top of my head. We're not those people anymore. We stood there until the wind picked up, carrying the scent of pine and distant wood smoke, then rejoined the kids who were building a leaf fort that would collapse spectacularly within minutes. Laughter rose around us, high and bright from the children, deeper and warmer from us. And in that simple sound I heard everything we'd fought for. Not perfection, not the absence of pain, but the presence of joy earned through effort and choice. Back home, life continued its gentle unfolding. We hosted Thanksgiving with both families, the table crowded with dishes and voices, no awkward silences or forced cheer, just the ordinary chaos of people who loved each other imperfectly but completely. Daniel carved the turkey with the same steady hands that had once trembled when he first heard my confession. I passed plates and caught his eye across the table, sharing a small, private smile that said more than words ever could. Later, when the house quieted and the kids were in their rooms, scrolling on phones or practicing guitar, we sat on the couch with the last of the wine, feet tangled under a blanket. He looked at me, really looked, and said, "I'm glad we didn't give up." I set my glass down, took his face between my hands. I'm glad I learned how to forgive myself. We kissed then. Not urgently, not desperately, but slowly, deliberately, the way people kiss when they know exactly what they almost lost and exactly what they've gained. The truth I discovered all those years ago had kept revealing itself in widening circles. Leaving the safe marriage for passion had been an act of fear disguised as courage. Returning to it with brutal honesty had been the real bravery. Rebuilding it day by day had taught me that love isn't a feeling that strikes like lightning. It's a skill honed through practice. Through choosing the person beside you when the spark flickers low. Through staying when running feels easier. Passion hadn't vanished after Leo. It had waited patiently to be rediscovered in the safety of truth. In the security of mutual forgiveness. In the quiet certainty that the person across from you had seen your darkest parts and still reached for your hand. Daniel and I weren't the couple who had once stood on that Chicago conference floor, nor the fractured pair who'd sat at the kitchen table spilling secrets into the night. We were something else entirely. Scarred, yes, but whole. Tested, but unbroken. Ordinary in the most beautiful way, because ordinary love, when chosen freely, fiercely, daily, becomes the rarest form of extraordinary. As winter settled in again, with lights strung along the porch and the promise of another year ahead, I no longer looked back for proof of what I'd survived. I looked forward, at the man beside me, at the children growing into their own lives, at the home we'd rebuilt together, and felt only gratitude, deep and steady. The story of leaving for passion and discovering the truth had ended not with a grand revelation, but with the quiet, enduring beauty of two people who had broken, mended, and chosen each other again. And in that choosing, in every small, honest moment that followed, I finally understood. The safest place isn't the one without storms. It's the one you build together, storm after storm, until the foundation is so strong that no wind can shake it. That was our truth now, and it was enough.